It is truly a pleasure for me to welcome my friend and my former colleague, Ralph C. Wood, to Aquinas College for what I hope will be the first of many visits. In particular, I would like to acknowledge and thank Dr. Wes Easley, who was just up here from Vanderbilt University's Medical Center, for organizing Professor Wood's visit to Nashville, and our president, Sister Mary Sarah, for the opportunity to have this lecture here today. Professor Wood was born and raised in East Texas and pursued his undergraduate degree and a master's degree at East Texas State University. He took a second master's degree and a doctorate from the University of Chicago's Divinity School, where he studied under such illustrious figures as the eminent literary critic and theorist Wayne C. Booth and the prominent scholar of American religion Martin Marty. During the span of his highly accomplished academic career, Dr. Wood has held the following positions. He was full professor of religion and the J. Allen Easley Professor of Religion at Wake Forest University, where he taught for 26 years. Distinguished Professor of Religion at Samford University. The Reverend Robert J. Randall Distinguished Chair of Christian Culture at Providence College, a Dominican institution. And the Mary Ann Remick Senior Visiting Fellowship at the University of Notre Dame's Center for Faith and Culture. Dr. Wood is currently the University Professor of Theology and Literature at Baylor University in Waco, Texas, a position he has held since 1998. I would point out the position of University Professor is a distinguished one in higher education, and it's traditionally only conferred upon scholars whose scope and expertise is broad enough to teach across multiple disciplines. Professor Wood's publications are too numerous for me to recount. He is the author of 7 books, including The Comedy of Redemption, Christian Faith and the Comic Vision in 4 American Novelists, an extraordinary book entitled Flannery O'Connor and the Christ-Haunted South, and a study entitled The Gospel According to Tolkien, Visions of the Kingdom in Middle-earth, speaking to his topic today. He is one of the world's leading experts in the area of Flannery O'Connor studies. O'Connor, the 20th century noted Catholic fiction writer from Georgia. And Professor Wood writes and speaks widely on O'Connor, Tolkien, Chesterton, C.S. Lewis, Dostoevsky, and the broad theme of the intersection of faith, culture, and the arts, particularly literature. In conclusion, I would like to point out that Professor Wood occupies what I take to be a very unique and I think providential place in the world of higher education today. One of his books, a book I admire a great deal, is entitled Contending for the Faith. I think the title is itself extraordinary. Contending for the Faith, the Church's Engagement with Culture. This is ever the image in my imagination of my friend and former colleague, Professor Wood. He is an agonist. He is one who contends, one who struggles to proclaim the message of the gospel as a confessing Christian within the increasingly hostile environment of academic culture. Dr. Wood has spent a long and accomplished career eloquently articulating and defending the message that faith takes form in cultural expression, that the Word of God with a capital W is reflected through words with a smaller w in literature and in the arts and in culture. I hope you will join me in welcoming to Aquinas College Professor Ralph Wood. Very much.
Well, I'm extraordinarily grateful for that generous introduction, and I would say about it only, I wish I might have lived long enough to have known the deceased. He was just eulogized. Seriously, it is a delight to be here. There are a few more chairs if anyone needs them and rather not stand, but you're welcome to stand if you so desire. But I really do want to make sure that you can hear me. And if at any moment I drop my voice, then please raise your hand and I will try to project it more clearly. I would like to talk with you this afternoon about Tolkien, and specifically about the Lord of the Rings. So here we begin to divide the elect from the reprobate. So how many of you have read the Lord of the Rings? Oh my, wonderful, wonderful. W.H. Auden said there are only 2 kinds of people. Tolkien was his tutor, by the way, in this world. It consists of those who have read the Lord of the Rings and those who will eventually read The Lord of the Rings. So you're all included. Let me just tell you a bit about the story behind it in case you don't know. And that is that in the year 2000, the millennial year, a popular journal in England, the Telegraph, took a poll to decide what was the most important book of the 20th century. And of course, everyone assumed D.H. Lawrence's Lady Chatterley's Lover, T.S. Eliot's The Wasteland, James Joyce's Ulysses. Some work like that would surely be named the most important book of the 20th century. To the shock and horror of all the literati, Tolkien's Lord of the Rings was named overwhelmingly to be the most important book of the 20th century. Well, of course, this just wouldn't do. So the Folio Society, the Rolls Royce of book clubs in England, said, we will conduct our own poll, and we will show that those who really know books will determine truly the most important book of the 20th century. So the Folio Society had its poll, and you see where we're going? The Lord of the Rings wins once again, overwhelmingly. And so my aim here this afternoon is to try to tell you why Tolkien is such an important figure for what I call our time of terror. Tolkien in 1937 had written a short little book called The Hobbit for his children and for their pleasure. Every year he gave as his Christmas present to his children a work that he had created, usually a poem, sometimes drawings. Tolkien was quite a good artist. But this year he had written this book called The Hobbit, and it began like this. As he was doing that task which professors dread most of all, grading exams, he turned over a blue book page and found that it had been left blank by the student inadvertently. And at last he had a moment to lift his snout from the trough of work and to just write what came to his mind. And this following sentence came to his mind. In a hole in the ground there lived a hobbit. And after he had written it, he began to ask himself, well, why did I write that? What's a hobbit? Because Tolkien believed that language is revelatory, that language is not arbitrary, that language teaches us the most fundamental things. And so that word had come into his mind, as it were, out of nowhere, until he remembered that the Old English word holbytla, H-O-L-B-Y-T-L-A, means hole dweller. And so this word had been coughed up from his deep subconsciousness, and so he writes this book called The Hobbit for his children. They began to pass it around the neighborhood there in Oxford, and it is popular among them. So a man named Rayner Unwin at a London publisher gets word of this little book that's making the rounds in Oxford, and he says, because people said, you really ought to publish this. He said, I'll do it on one condition, that my 15-year-old son will read it, and if he likes it, we'll publish it. So in 1937, The Lord of the Rings was published to surprising sales and great acclaim, and like a good commercial-minded man, Unwin makes a quick trip back to Oxford and says, Tolkien, you've written this wonderful book. We want more. Tolkien says, there's no problem. I've got it right upstairs. So he traipses up to his upstairs bedroom/office and brings down a thick sheaf of what became the Silmarillion. Has any of you read the Silmarillion? Good, good. And of course, Rayner Unwin begins to look at it. Names, dates, chronicles, events, no plot, no development of character. He slaps his forehead and said, oh my God, this is like reading the phone book in Elvish. We want more hobbits. And so Tolkien had been creating this gigantic legendarium, as he called it, trying to retell the entire cosmic story in new mythological form that would show in that form its deeply Christian character, set upon the task of trying to incorporate these little creatures called hobbits into that vast legendarium. So from 1937 until 1954, 17 years, he labored long and hard to create The Lord of the Rings. And of course, you know the rest of the story. It became an immediate bestseller. It's never been out of print. It's been published in numerous languages, and we are here today to celebrate that book. So I want to try to tell you what's going on in that book by looking at some specific issues, but one more matter first. Tolkien was the premier scholar of his day of Beowulf, the great medieval Old English epic that had always struck people as strange because it clearly is a pagan work. It's told basically from the point of view of Danish classic heroism of a Germanic, Nordic kind, where the hero is one who dies in defense of his clan or tribe, along with his captain, the person to whom he owes greatest allegiance, but nothing Christian about that, except hints now and then that have a kind of overtone that is not purely pagan, but is subtly Christian. No one can figure that out until Tolkien. Tolkien says the answer is this: Beowulf was written more than likely by Christian monks who wanted to honor the pagan world, not by spitting at it or stomping it to death, but rather saying, what do we as Christians have to recover and to affirm in that pagan world, because Christians take the pagan world seriously. Remember the great motto of St. Augustine, take the spoils of the Egyptians. Of course, from the flight of the Egyptians, the Israelites out of Egypt, everything that's pagan and good, adopt, baptize, infuse with new Christian quality and claim it for Christ. So that's exactly what he's doing in The Lord of the Rings. It is not an overtly Christian book. It is a covertly Christian book. Remember, all the events occur long before the calling of Abraham, long before the establishment of Israel as God's chosen people, long before the prophets, long before the incarnation of our Lord, long before the church, etc., etc., etc. However, he wants to silently imbue this work with the deepest Christian kind of convictions and concerns, so that if the reader catches them, well and good. If the reader doesn't catch them, be careful, well and good. Here is the big difference between Tolkien and his dear friend C.S. Lewis. They cannot be collapsed. They have fundamentally opposing agenda. For Lewis, everything that he does is an act of evangelism. Lewis says, I'm out to win souls for Christ. And therefore, you all know who Aslan is. Aslan is obviously the Christ of Narnia. There is no Christ in The Lord of the Rings. Because here's what Tolkien said that should shock you and humble you. Already I can spot some writers in the room whom I know from the past, some I've just met. Tolkien said, if my work has to stand on Christian props, they should be knocked out from under it. I want my work to have its own intrinsic artistic integrity. It must stand first and foremost and last and ultimately as a work of art, not as a Christian work of art. I think that has to do with Tolkien's Catholicism. Tolkien believed the church is where evangelism should occur. I'm sometimes asked on the lecture circuit, well, how many souls has Tolkien won to Christ? And I'm not afraid or unwilling to answer, perhaps none. But that is not what matters. He didn't set out to win souls to Christ. He set out to write a book that would have such enduring importance that it would last and last, so that eventually perhaps people will begin to see what's going on in it and we become to appropriate for themselves the deep undercurrents that are Christian. So here's my prophecy. I may be stoned before I start. I believe J.R.R. Tolkien's Lord of the Rings will last as long as literature lasts. I don't have the same confidence about Lewis. I know it's going to anger some of you, but remember, you can't learn unless you are willing to be offended. I tell students, you'll get nowhere unless I can offend you, because being offended makes you have to think. I think Tolkien will last. I am less confident about Lewis. What Tolkien does in this work, among many other things, I will shamelessly advertise the book I'm donating to the library at Aquinas College, The Gospel According to Tolkien, which is utterly unlike anything I'm saying today. It's organized around the 7 virtues of the Christian faith, reading Tolkien's Lord of the Rings in light of those virtues. It's just been adopted by the president of Catholic U as the study book for his own group there. So it's a book that I'm gladly willing to recommend you, and as I say, shameless self-advertisement. But it will be available in the library here. I have students who come to me and say, my parents are very upset with me. I have switched my major from medicine or business to literature or theology or philosophy. And my parents say to me, oh, you just want the easy way out. You don't want to work hard. You don't want to do physics problems. You don't want to do chemistry calculations and the like. You want the easy way of just reading literary, philosophical, or theological works. My reply, I hope you can see coming, no, you've chosen the harder way. It takes more brain work, in the deepest sense of brain work, to read a great work of literature or philosophy or theology, or at least as great a brain work as to work the most difficult problem in astrophysics, because you're using the brain in a different order. You're using the brain in an imaginative way. So that when Tolkien imbues this one all-conquering ring with 3 powers, he has thought long and hard. He was a master of 14 languages, almost all of them dead. He could teach himself Anglo-Saxon as a high school student, so much so that they had trouble finding anyone at Oxford who could teach him more Anglo-Saxon than he already taught himself. He invents 2 forms of Elvish, one of them based on Welsh, the other based on Finnish. He is a man who has thought, who studied, who has pondered, who has above all infused his own imagination with the great deep books of the whole Western world. So that when he gives the ring these 3 powers, he's not just, sitting down, whatever comes first to his mind. He's profoundly informed in a way that will enable him to hit upon 3 powers that are distinct and immensely threatening to our time and at any other time. So let's look at them. They're on your outline. Though I declined my dear friend Aaron Urbanzic's offer to have them projected onto a screen, because George Will has said that PowerPoint has killed public speaking in America. My teacher, Martin Marty, likes to quote Lord Acton, modified. Acton said, if power corrupts, Marty adds, PowerPoint corrupts absolutely. Because PowerPoint prevents you from having to think, from having to listen to what the speaker is saying. So I hope you'll listen. You'll be able to take this home and use it at the bottom of your bird cage. You'll at least have some use come out of this lecture. So Tolkien gives to the ring these 3 powers that no one but Tolkien could have thought of, and that have more relevance to our time than anything seems to be imaginable. The power of invisibility, the power of immortality, and worst of all, the power of coercion. So let's look at those 3 powers and see how they work in the Lord of the Rings and how they work in our time of terror. Invisibility. if you are in possession of the ring and you wear the ring, you suddenly become invisible. You cannot be seen. It gives you the power to disappear. And of course, Gollum has had that ring for 500 years. Remember, Tolkien is doing two things in The Lord of the Rings. He's writing it as a profoundly pre-Christian book, but wanting again to infuse it with Christian qualities. So one way he does so is to use the Anglo-Saxon word weird, W-Y-R-D. This is not in your outline. It's worth remembering, though. Listen to the word weird. It's the basis for our modern word weird, but spelled W-Y-R-D. In the Old English world, weird meant fate. What happens to you beyond any control that you have over things that you're simply destined to have happen to you. Gradually, the Anglo-Saxons, upon their conversion to the Christian faith, transmuted that word weird to mean providence. So a lot of things are fated in Tolkien, but within and over and under and above all, through fate, things become providentially ordered. So it's providential that Gollum is the one who found the ring, who's kept it for 500 years, and who has done the least possible damage for having the ring, because you remember how he uses it, don't you all? To catch fish. He can disappear and grab fish, and then what does he do? Anyone remember? He eats them. In what fashion, young lady? You're doing so well. He eats them. She gets it. She's seen the movie. That's okay. Eats them raw. Look at what Tolkien's doing there. Gollum denies the very fundament of civilization, which is the cooked meal, around which, of course, fellowship is found through eating together. He eats in utter solitude. He eats raw fish, but therefore the ring has not caused great damage. Frodo is very tempted to put on the ring every time he faces horrendous danger, because he can get himself out of danger immediately by putting it on, even though he might leave at great danger his companions. And so Frodo's huge growth in moral and spiritual excellence derives from his increasing resistance against the power of invisibility. He won't use it. He won't use it until the end. We will get there. Well, where did Tolkien come up with this idea? What is its importance for our time? Tolkien had learned Greek and Latin in high school. His high school class put on a Greek comedy in Greek. His senior, what we'd call his senior year. In fact, when it came time for the graduation exercise, they sang God Save the King, Edward, in Greek as a kind of joke. But that means he's read Plato. He's read the Republic. Dare I ask, how many have read the Republic in this room? Look at all the sisters. Thank you. All the professed, fully professed, they've read the Republic. Because in the Republic, Socrates is having a really important dialogue with a figure named Glaucon, G-L-A-U-C-O-N, his main interlocutor in the Republic, where Socrates is making the most fundamental humanistic claim that to know the good is to do the good. If you will only show people what is really good, they will do it, because good has its own intrinsic reward. You don't have to pay people. You don't have to reward people to be good. If they're given the opportunity to do good because they've been shown to do good, they will do it. Glaucon says, wait just a minute. Wait just a minute. There was a man named Gyges, G-Y-G-E-S, who had this magical ring, and that with that magical ring, he could become instantly invisible. He knew the good, but with that ring, he could do other things than the good. So what does Gyges begin to do? He begins to steal. Easy. He can go and swipe anything he wants, disappear, get it, disappear again, and have it. He's not satisfied just with getting things. He begins to beat up on his enemies in the same way. He can get revenge because he can disappear and no one caught him. He goes, of course, alas, much further. He can get all of the decadent sex he wants. He can simply appear in the bed of women, have them, and then disappear. And of course, the outcome you can see already. He winds up, of course, killing the king, making the queen his own through the power of his own invisibility. And so Glaucon is a better Christian, by the way, than Socrates. Glaucon has a kind of instinctive sense of original sin, that if people are given the opportunity to do what they want to do without let or hindrance, they're probably more likely to do evil than to do good. So why does Tolkien hit upon this idea of invisibility for his ring as it might apply to our world? Remember, Tolkien and Lewis are disagreed in the following way. Tolkien says, I cordially despise allegory. I don't like one-for-one correspondences. I don't like, he didn't like the Narnia Chronicle, alas, must confess. He didn't like the fact that Aslan equals Christ. Gandalf doesn't equal Christ. He has Christ-like qualities, but so does Frodo. So does Sam. But he said, I do like historical application. I do want readers to read my book and see what's going on there has implications for both historical events, but also for our own time. So how does invisibility appear in our world? And what do we do with it? And how might it be resisted? I asked that question one time at a Christian classical academy. We have these now springing up all over Texas. I know you have some of them in Tennessee. They're wonderful, wonderful things. I said, what would be the best contemporary analog of the power of invisibility? A young, very bright senior raised her hand and said, the internet. Exactly right. We are invisible on the internet. You can say anything on the internet and be held utterly unaccountable for it. Not being made responsible for anything you say, anything you post on the internet. So rather than enhancing community, it seems to me it has broken down community because people can achieve things instantly that ought to take the slow, gradual effort of friendship, of getting to know each other, of having the right to make this or that kind of claim, either for oneself or claims put upon others. When Tolkien was asked, what do you think to be the major form of magic in our time? Invisibility being one form of magic. By the way, there's next to no magic in Lord of the Rings. Gandalf is not a magician. He's a wizard. The word wizard is from the Old English word wis, W-Y-S, the root of our word wise. Gandalf is profoundly wise. And insofar as he's able to make these fantastic fireworks, it's because he's mastered the craft of fire, slowly, gradually, and over a long period of time. So this is Tolkien's thesis. He says in one of his letters, there ought to be a considerable separation between the conception of an idea and its realization. And by idea, he means all the things we do. Being a student, being a teacher, being a sister, being a wife, being a husband, being a father, being a mother. It takes long, slow, arduous effort to learn how to do any of those things well. My wife and I celebrated our 50th anniversary in August. We're beginning to get the hang of it after 50 years. I'm in my 42nd year of teaching and having the best time of my life because I think I've begun to get the hang of it. What Tolkien says, magic in its modern form occurs through machines. Machines crunch time. Machines, rather than making us have that long, slow, arduous effort between conception and realization, make that time span ever shorter until it's collapsed. Look at the very phrase, crunch time. How then to overcome this terrible lure of invisibility? I was glad, by the way, when I spoke at Montgomery Bell, none of the students were allowed to have their smartphones as I spoke. You know what would have happened? I don't see any of these students with smartphones. Thank you. Someone has treated you very well. Someone has honored you by not letting you come and concentrate thereupon. I argue in this lecture that Tolkien this is somewhat of an adaptation of my book, that invisibility is best answered by faith. I'm looking at the three great theological virtues, faith, hope, and charity. Because the New Testament has a series of words for faith, when rendered into Latin, that thus could be translated variously. One of them is fides, F-I-D-E-S. That is faith that so and so is true. But the more basic Latin word is fiducia, F-I-D-U-C-I-A, which means trust. A fiduciary loan is one that you take out. The bank has the trust that you will repay it. Faith in its most basic form is trust in God. Trusting one's life into God's good keeping through God's people called the church, through God's Son called our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ, and therefore through all the trusting relationships that derive from that. So look at the way in which the company of 9 walkers, now notice Tolkien, not wanting to be allegorical, doesn't dare have 12 walkers. You got it? That would be handwriting on the wall. But they have a certain kind of likeness to Christ's own disciples. But they're bound by a fundamental trust in each other. So that when Elrond, the elf lord, is forming the basic company of 9, and by the way, like the church, it's that true multicultural company. You know, that you may know there's only one word that appears in every college catalog in the nation. Anyone want to guess what it is?
Diversity.
She said it. Diversity, oh, diversity. Sorry. Diversity is the only word that appears in every American college catalog because we believe that if you have enough diversity, you will be creative. When in fact, unless diversity is built around unity, all you have is fights. The gays hate the straights, the frats hate the GDIs, and on it goes. So for Tolkien, when Elrond is creating, helping call this community into being, look how multicultural it is, multiracial it is. What moved Chesterton so profoundly at the great Eucharistic Congress in Dublin in 1932 was to see all of these nations, all of these languages, all of these colors, all of these races being united around one thing and one thing only: Christ and Christ's kingdom. So look at the multicultural diversity. Gandalf, a wizard, clearly the leader, though fallible. Gandalf is not perfect. And by the way, Gandalf dies, but he's not resurrected. He's brought back to life, which of course is to say he is resuscitated like Lazarus, like Jairus' daughter, and so forth. Because remember, as an Orthodox Catholic Christian, Tolkien not dare create a second resurrection. There's only one resurrection, only one who met death and then came back to life, not to die again. Gandalf goes to the Western Isles when at the end, when the end of the world comes, Gandalf will die. So you've got a wizard. Then you have two enemies, a dwarf named Gimli and an elf named Legolas. They're historic enemies. They don't like each other. Watch what happens by the end. They become deeply bonded in the truest friendship. Then you've got to have two of our species, humans. So you've got, of course, Aragorn, Strider, the rightly returning king of Gondor. And of course you have Boromir. Watch out for Boromir, by the way. Then you have two hobbits, obviously Frodo, the one who is the chosen ring bearer, and his sidekick, Samwise Gamgee, my favorite character, by the way. Always bumbling, always stumbling, always getting it wrong, just like me. So I like him. And then Elrond says, well, who else shall we choose? And one would think maybe an elf lord like Elrond himself, until Merry and Pippin, who are 28, which is to say, roughly speaking in Hobbit terms, about 18. So they're the only youngsters in the group. Remember, Frodo is 50 when he embarks upon the quest. That would be something like 35. And poor old Peter Jackson makes him 14 in the movies. Don't get me on that topic. And then just as Elrond is about to say, let's have two elf lords, comes the cry that may be the most profound 5 words in the book. But Frodo, we are your friends. And of course that persuades Elrond to let these two youngsters go. Aristotle says no one would ever willingly live without friends. Friends are the highest secular analog of what it means to know Christian sisterhood and brotherhood. So it's a company of profound trust in answer to this lure of invisibility. They will not use that ring to disappear. They will destroy that ring that the power of invisibility might be destroyed until one member of the company betrays them. Very much worth noting, lest you try to enlist Tolkien in the culture wars. Tolkien is not a culture warrior. A secular humanist doesn't invade the company and corrupt them. It's not an orc who breaks the company. It is Boromir, a member of the company, who destroys its trust and its unity. And so I ask my students, if you want to make historical applications, not allegories, roughly speaking, whom would Boromir most be like? So I ask you, in New Testament Christian terms, who would he most be like? Hands. Remember, the fundamental rule of good class discussion is, I will make a fool of myself. And the professor leads in that task. Anyone want to venture? Who is Boromir most like? Yes, ma'am, louder. Judas? Only a sister could get that right. Not Judas. He's not Judas. Judas, of course, not only betrays the company, he goes out, alas, and commits suicide. You have to say it louder. Did you get it right? You did. Okay. Because Peter, of course, himself betrays our Lord 3 times. And so if there are any echoes there It's Boromir as Peter, but Boromir is brought back in to the fellowship. I don't have time to go over this, but Aragorn shrives him in a perfect three-part act of reconciliation. He hears, first of all, his confessio oris. He said, I stole the ring from Frodo. But he says, I am terribly sorry. That, of course, is his contritio cordis, his sorrow of heart. But he says, I killed all the orcs I could that Merry and Pippin might go free. That's satisfactio operis, satisfaction through. See, that's what Tolkien is doing quietly, silently. My only claim to fame is I figured that out. It's in my book. So Tolkien is saying the answer to invisibility is community. And community has to be built around a proper Lord, a proper center, so that trust might be enabled and not coerced. Second power of the ring is the power of immortality. Why shouldn't somebody want that? Well, what kind of immortality does the ring bestow? Bilbo has had it only shortly. Notice what a hard time Bilbo has surrendering the ring. But when he's finally, by the way, largely by command on the part of Gandalf, give the ring to me, does he surrender it? But then he says in one of the most poignant lines in Tolkien, and listen to the homely metaphors here and similes, I feel like too little butter spread over too much bread. Isn't that a point? Too little butter over too much bread. You see his metaphor? He said, in other words, I have been given longer life than I would possibly have had without the ring, but I've not been given deeper and higher life. So what is Tolkien doing? He's addressing our world. He sees coming the total triumph of medicine understood. Now, don't get me wrong. I am not criticizing Wes Easley or any other physician or medical professor. Without modern science, my career would long be over without these high-powered digital hearing aids and many other things that we all enjoy. However, Tolkien is very worried that we live in a world that wants to live longer and longer and longer, but not better and better and better. I've used this line a couple of times when people have heard me, so please bear with me. When I brought Stanley Hauerwas, the great Duke ethicist, to Wake Forest, we drove by the huge hospital complex in Winston-Salem. Walker Percy points out that every medieval city was centered around a cathedral. Every modern city is centered around either a gigantic business complex, the Nashville skyline, a gigantic park, the Parthenon, or more likely a gigantic medical complex. And so as we passed by the huge Wake Forest School of Medicine and the Baptist Hospital, he said, behold the house that death has built. And then he added, if you ask the average American, what is the purpose of life? If we are caught off guard, we'll answer, the purpose of life is not to die. Anyone want to laugh? I mean, that's hilarious. The purpose of life is not to die, but to stay alive as long as possible. The better to have a good time. And so we have this extraordinary means of staying alive as long as possible. To have what Evelyn Waugh, that great curmudgeon Catholic Christian, says, in order that we might have that unwanted extra decade, lying with a diaper between our legs and not knowing that we exist. Percy says the last sound the average American will ever hear is the squish of nurses' shoes going down the hospital hall. Think of how our parents and foreparents died. Not to the tune of nurses' shoes squishing, but the family gathered around the bed, singing them into paradise. Tolkien is aware that when health becomes the ultimate good, health understood in physical terms, our whole culture has taken a fatal turn. A fatal turn. I learned this with a special acuity during my year at Providence College, a fine Dominican school in Rhode Island. When every day I would open the Providence paper and see anniversaries listed. Well, in Texas, the only time you list your anniversary is when you celebrate 10, 15, 50 years of marriage. And there would be these old guys and older women, anniversaries. I quickly came to understand that because Rhode Island is overwhelmingly Catholic, and I will add with no necessary sequence, overwhelmingly corrupt, no connection, no connection. It is the bluest state in the Union, and 2 Supreme Court justices have gone to prison. Here's the point, though. The church never or rarely celebrates the birthdays of its saints. We don't know when Augustine was born. No one much cares. We know the year roughly. Every nun knows when Augustine died. That's when we celebrate all the lives of our saints, including our lay saints. So your anniversary is your death day. That's the day you celebrate, because that's the day our lives come to their fruition, their completion, their finish. As Flannery O'Connor says, so that we return our lives to our Lord like the man in the parables of the talents, either multiplied, manifold, giving all of these gifts back to God, or empty-handed, having nothing to return. So for Tolkien, we live toward death. The whole point of life is not to stay alive as long as possible. The whole point of life is to die rightly and well. You Catholics have a very fine phrase, make a good death. Flannery O'Connor said, I thank God that I had a long illness before I had to face my death. We all want to drop dead of a heart attack or a stroke. As W.H. Auden said, cheap and quick. O'Connor says a long illness before death lets us prepare to die rightly, as I've said, to die well. The elves are naturally immortal. They do not die except by grief, notice well, or by physical attack. They come to envy what they call the gift of death that all other creatures have. The gift of death. You see, death is for us the only enemy. When Paul says it's the final enemy to be overcome, he means by that overcome because we die no longer in fear of death, but by embracing death. Cardinal George of Chicago says the Christian motto should be, dying is good for you. That's exactly right. Dying is good for you. And I know that's hard for you young ladies at your age to understand. But that's deeply true. We're all preparing for what we might call premature martyrdom. We're going to be killed one way or another. How are we going to die is a great question. And so God has given us, after the fall, of course, as a consequence of our sinful condition, the gift of death, the treasure of dying. One might even say the miracle of death. So I think Tolkien, therefore, assigns over against the horror of immortality of an artificial kind the great gift of hope. And so this work is deeply imbued with hopefulness, often in the face of hopelessness. And the reason is, as I tried to explain to the young men at Montgomery Bell, Tolkien distinguishes between what he calls an adventure. How many can tell me the subtitle of The Hobbit? Hands. The lady in the back row, loudly. There and back again. So you see, an adventure is a circle. Bilbo's bored. Life in Hobbiton is dull. The dwarves come by and say, let us recoup the gold that Smaug stole. They go and get the gold. He comes back home more or less as he was, basically unchanged. And Tolkien is not against adventures. Please understand. Aquinas said there ought to be time for jokes, for example. Christians are meant to have fun. Christians are meant to go on adventures, but not to live for adventures. So Frodo is not put on an adventure. He's put upon a quest. So I'd like to turn to the back page, if you would, and read a quotation from Tolkien. The very first one. Bilbo used often to say that there was only one road, that it was like a great river. Its springs at every doorstep, and every path was its tributary. Please read the next sentence in light of September 9, 2001. It's a dangerous business, Frodo, going out of your door, he used to say. Everyone in this room endangered herself and himself by going out our doors this morning. On that day, 3,000 people went out their doors. For he said, you step into the road, and if you don't keep your feet, there's no knowing where you might be swept off to. Now, Tolkien, not wanting to say in a preacherly Christian fashion, you're traveling the road of faith, and unless you know how to keep your feet properly grounded by faith and hope and charity, you'll be swept off. But listen to his song. The road goes ever on, and Flanders and Swan have set this to nice music, by the way. I'm tempted to sing it, but then I would kill you. The road goes ever on and on, down from the door where it began. Now far ahead the road is gone, and I must follow if I can. Now Bilbo had written the first version when he was a young man, but now he has reached my age when he gives the second version. Look at his change. Pursuing that road with weary, he had earlier said, with eager feet. This row right here is full of eager feet. Thank you, ladies, for having eager feet. But he now has very weary feet. Until it joins some larger way. And larger way means, of course, beyond death. But he's not going to preach to us and say there are two paths beyond death. Instead, he says, where many paths and errands meet. And whither then? I cannot say. The key to that whole wonderful, simple poem, Tolkien is not trying to write high literary art, mainly songs to be sung, is the word errand, where many paths and errands meet. Because among other things, Tolkien is trying to recover the older meaning of words for which we have lost their original significance. So remember, the Shire is patrolled by those figures who go around the edge of it. They are the sheriffs, i.e. sheriffs. So that's where our word lies. The word errand does not mean going to Walmart for dental floss. What does the older word errand mean? And students may be able to answer this better than their elders. What is an errand in the older sense, in the Renaissance, even in the Middle Ages? Any idea? I bet you do. Have you heard of knights errant? Not yet. You will. That's okay. Knights errant are those who have a mission, who go out on a quest, usually to do some daring deed in honor of their ladies. And so Tolkien adopts that word in its older form to mean mission, purpose, pilgrimage, but above all, quest. A quest is not something you volunteer for. The sisters in this room didn't volunteer to become sisters, but only after they were called to become sisters and heard that call and answered that call. So let's listen to Frodo's response to that business. Number 2. Remember, Bilbo volunteers. I'm bored. I want to strike out for, as we say at Baylor, the left coast and have a good time. Listen to Frodo. I am not made for perilous quests. I wish I had never seen the ring. Why did it come to me? Why was I chosen? Each of you sisters has asked that question. Everyone in this room had better have been asked that question, because Tolkien believes that every human being is given a quest, a unique vocation that cannot be fulfilled by anyone other than you and you and you. And listen to what Gandalf says. Such questions cannot be answered. You hear the deep mystery here? There's no rational answer to why you were called to be a sister. This is a deep mystery. But insofar as it may be understood, he says, note well, you may be sure that it was not for any merit that others do not possess. You're not better than everybody else. You happen to be the best hobbit of the Shire, as Frodo's nephew, but you're a fallen hobbit just like them. And then he adds, not for power or wisdom at any rate, but you have been chosen. And then he adds, of course, wonderfully, you must therefore use such strength and wits as you have in pursuing the quest. And the way they pursue the quest is not by becoming invisible and making these sudden leaps from here to there, finding themselves therefore at the brink of Mount Doom, where Frodo could cast the ring into those volcanic fires only hot enough to melt that ring. No invisibility anytime used for any advantage. Instead, half the time they're lost. Remember how long it takes to get to Bree Inn? They don't know where they are. They're stumbling around. That sounds like your life. It sounds like mine. Half the time they're going backwards. So the quest does not have a there and back again quality. A quest has the quality of starting here and aiming for that speaker over there, but a meandering backward, forward, hemming and hawing and getting lost and being rescued and getting lost again, and not necessarily arriving at the end in one's lifetime. So let us read what I think may be the profoundest quotation, number 8, on the backside. They are just approaching Mordor. Remember, Mordor is the Old English word for murder. You can hear the close cognates there. Frodo says, I don't like anything here at all. And remember that Tolkien is a green. Tolkien is a green. He stopped driving what he called his motor car when he saw what the paved roads had done to rural England. He thought the automobile had ruined rural England. He preferred, like C.S. Lewis, to walk when he could. And so this is a polluted realm. This is Cleveland or Detroit or you name your own favorite polluted city. Earth, air, and water all seem accursed. But notice, so our path is laid. Now, what I try to emphasize in my book is the use of the passive voice. Ordinarily something that my friend Jennifer Trafton would not do as a writer of fine children's books. The active voice is the fundamental pattern of the English sentence, except when you want to show someone who's being acted upon. So notice, Frodo doesn't say, and so we have laid our paths. You with me? That would be an active voice sentence. Can you hear the quality of dependence, the quality of humility, the acknowledgement that providence has provided their way? Though he doesn't use that term, he doesn't know that term. And so our path is laid. Listen to Sam. illiterate, bumbling, fumbling son of Gaffer Gamgee, the peasant who can't speak good English. We're going to see him make a colossal mistake here. I want everyone to catch his grammatical error in places where grammar is still taught, such as Aquinas, St. Cecilius, I hope. Listen. Yes, that's so, said Sam. And we shouldn't be here at all if we had known more about it before we started. My wonderful Catholic professor rattled my eye teeth when he said one day in class, I was a college junior, if each of us could see ahead for what lies waiting us down the road, many of us would not choose to go forward with our lives. Sam is saying exactly that. If we had known what lay ahead, we would have rebelled. We would not have gone on this quest. But notice he starts to qualify. I suppose it's often that way. The brave things, brave means wondrous and glorious, not courageous, as in the word bravo or brava, a word of accolade and praise. The wondrous things in the old tales and songs, notice folks seem to have just been landed in them. Passive voice again. Usually their paths were laid that way, but I expect they had lots of chances. So notice Tolkien's rescue of radical freedom. They had lots of chances, like us, of turning back. Only they didn't. And if they had turned back, we shouldn't know because they'd be forgotten. See, Tolkien is making the case here that everyone in this room has the vocation to, in our own minuscule way, to push forward the great cosmic drama in which everyone in this room has a role. And if we don't fulfill that role, we will be forgotten, in the proper sense of the word forgotten, because we will have not only not forwarded that great quest, we will have arrested that great quest. But then he goes on to say, we hear about those, and here's this grammatical error, you all catch it, as just went on. We need, of course, the pronoun who, but Sam is properly semi-literate. And not all to a good end, mind you. At least not to what folk inside a story and not outside a story call a good end. Many of us in this room will not come to a good end. We will be killed by an Arab terrorist attack. Cancer is probably ramping in the innards of someone in this room right now who doesn't know it. I'm talking with a friend who is praying for and working with a Parkinson's disease victim. He says, I've never witnessed more horrible pain in my life. And remember how our Lord died with a great shout of agony. That's not what matters, says Sam. Notice, when he asked, don't the great tales ever end? And Frodo answered, no, they never end as tales. But the people in them come and go when their part's ended. And then watch Frodo's fudging, almost. Our part will end later. Oh, then he catches himself. No, our part, they will end sooner. The question is not whether our part will end later or sooner. The question will be how we pursued the quest, how faithfully and how hopefully we pursued the quest. Because remember in Romans 4, Paul speaks of hope beyond hope. What I think Paul means by that is if our hope is that things are going to get better, give it up. My parents taught me your life is going to be better than ours, as our lives were better than our parents, thus giving me, I thought, the right to say to my children, your lives are going to be better than mine. That's false. My grandparents were sharecroppers. I had an uncle who could neither read nor write. My parents were the first college generation students. I, by the grace of God, and my wife were able to get graduate degrees. Our daughter is teaching at the University of Tennessee, Knoxville. But I tremble to think about the world in which our two grandsons are being brought up in. My tiny little East Texas high school has a full-time drug dog that sniffs the lockers of every student twice a day to detect the drugs that are hidden there. I could step out onto the avenue here and do drugs within an hour if I so desired. The lives of my grandsons are going to be far worse than what I faced in the way of temptation and horror. So you've got to have hope beyond hope. Hope that the final victory is God's, that the gates of hell will not prevail against the coming of God's kingdom. That's the hope that Tolkien in veiled, quiet form holds forward. Quickly to the end, the third power, and the worst power of all, is coercion. If you have the ring, you can coerce others to want the ring and subject their wills to you. And that's what Sauron has done, of course. Frodo feels ever more pressure upon him as he bears the ring. He becomes ever more emaciated, wasted away, until he's barely a body at all. Sam is able to carry him up Mount Doom because he's a wraith. Because remember, it not only lets you live longer, it lets you be stretched into a thinner and thinner wraith-like subject. Until finally, Tolkien does the most surprising thing of all. And can you see how this is the most Christian point of the book? I've held in my hands at Marquette University Tolkien's original manuscript, where he altered the ending of the novel as follows. See if you can get it. When Frodo approaches Mount Doom, as I say, emaciated, wasted, barely to speak above a whisper, he suddenly booms out in the original, "I will not do what I have come to do. The ring is mine." Whereupon, of course, he puts it on from around his neck, disappears, except by the kind of almost radar-like detection that the corrupt Gollum has. Gollum, of course, grabs him, bites the ring off, dances his great jig of joy back into the volcanic cracks where he, of course, is consumed and the ring with it. That's not how Tolkien wrote the final pages. Because you see, then Frodo would have become Sauron's ventriloquist. In other words, Sauron would be speaking through Frodo in a way to have totally overwhelmed Frodo's will. So listen to how Christian Tolkien made that ending in the following way. Where he has Frodo, I saw the line scratched out. I saw Tolkien's new words written in. "I do not choose to do what I came to do. The ring is mine." You hear the difference? In the former, Frodo is a complete victim, completely overpowered by the ring's coercive might. In the latter, there is still a modicum of freedom. For it's the great Catholic doctrine that a person who doesn't have a minuscule ability to say no to evil and yes to good would no longer be a human being, would be an animal, the image of God in her or him having been totally destroyed. So Frodo, in his act of defiance, is minimally free. A student once asked him, I wanted Frodo to win. I wanted him to walk up to the ring and cast it with full power into the cracks of doom. And I said to him, that would be the least Christian of all endings. Frodo would have then been Christ. Christ alone has the power to resist evil completely. All of us are his fallen disciples who resist evil to the extent that he enables us to, and our cooperative grace responding to his operative grace, so do. But short of the eschaton and the end of things, we are going to fail. This troubles my students when I say we are going to lose. Sauron is going to win in earthly terms. Are you willing to fight a losing battle by not adopting the weapons of the enemy? That's the test that Tolkien is putting Aquinas College, the Mother House of the Dominican Sisters, St. Cecilia's Academy. Are you producing young men and young women who will not adopt the tactics of the enemy and thereby become the enemy? Three of those being invisibility, false immortality, and the coerced will. And from what I can see in my very short visit, the glorious good answer is yes, you're producing people like that. And I thank you.